Well, good morning, everybody. I believe that we are now live, and I will resort to the traditional method of establishing whether a webinar is working or not by hoping people give a thumbs up right now. Excellent. We're away. Terrific. Well, thank you for joining us, everyone. There are literally hundreds of you on this webinar, including some very special guests who we're going to chat to today. And I'd also like to welcome our Deputy Chair, Gary Nugent, who's also joining us, as well as another very auspicious board member who we will meet in just a second. But first, I would like to recognise the traditional owners of the lands and where I'm gathered today, which is inside the Bunnings head office, which is where we find the FightMND head office. So to the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and the Bunanyong people of the Kulin Nation, we extend our deepest respect to your elders, past and present, and welcome anybody from those nations or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander heritage from around Australia who might be joining us today for this very, very special event, which is really all about gaining insights into what has been the impact of your support? And I guess to quantify what level of support we're talking about, it's $115 million invested into MND research over the last 10 years, which is a pretty short period of time for a charity and quite a remarkable achievement. And we couldn't have done it without any of you. Quite simply, that's the engine room of what we do and how we hope to grow and how we expect to make a difference and take the fight right up to the beast that is MND, and eventually we want to find a cure. But it's not that simple and it's not that straightforward. And we do many, many different things, and our footprint's growing right across the globe. And the globe is changing. I'm sure anyone who checked their superannuation balance in the last day or two would realise things can turn around really quickly, for good and for bad. We find cures evolving all the time for all kinds of medical malaise, and that's what drives us every day. And also, we thrive on the fact that we really are an organisation built on community. That's really the strength of us. And if you've been to the football on the weekend of the Big Freeze, you would note that 80,000 people wearing a beanie at the MCG is quite a remarkable impact. And it's something we're very proud of, and it's something we're really excited about, that in the coming months you'll start to see as you walk the dog or you duck down to the milk bar in your bare feet to get some milk and, well, I guess in my mum's day it would have been a pack of cigarettes as well. You just start to see these blue beanies bobbing up around the community, and it makes us proud. And I think people wearing them also feel a sense of commitment and a sense of community to something that only affects 2,600 people at any one time across Australia. But of course, it affects so many more people. It affects families, it affects friends, it affects workmates. And that's a dynamic number as well, because every day, approximately 2 people find out that they receive well, it's difficult to talk about a diagnosis, and we'll talk about that in a minute with Jan Danaher. But they find out that they now have MND, which is a disease for which there's no cure. And then we lose 2 people on average every day as well. So when you think about that as a dynamic number, a tragic dynamic number, it does affect the community. And you don't have to walk too far in a beanie to have someone come up to you and say, you know what, I love seeing those. I lost my auntie to MND, or we have someone at our work who's fighting it right now. So we're really proud of the fact that even though it's a small and rare disease, it is something that permeates the whole community, and the community responds enormously. I'm really thrilled today to welcome you all, because this is a bit of an interactive session as well. We think it's paramount that, whilst we can share with you information and clinical stats and stuff, actually meeting the people doing the research, meeting the people living with MND, and meeting the people who are helping us and joining us as partners gives you a far better insight to where your donations and your support is going. So to that extent, I'm really thrilled to welcome, well, his most important job is as a director of the FightMND organisation, has a side hustle running the AFL, which seems to go all right for a few months a year. And he is, of course, Andrew Dillon. And we're very grateful for his time on the cusp of the gather round, where everybody's heading South Australia, that he can still join us here in Melbourne. Andrew, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Great to be here, Matt. How are you going? And welcome to everyone who's joined online.
So, Andrew, I like to try and make these moments. We've had a few events where people have been able to actually come and meet us. This is a little more impersonal on a webinar, but we want to keep it as sort of relaxed and friendly as possible. Tell us about your journey and how you became connected with FightMND. We know the AFL is, but what about you personally?
So, well, there was a couple of parts. One was Lewis Martin, who's a former board member, was originally on the board, and then also Pat Cunningham, who's one of the founders, along with Neil, who'd worked at the AFL, and I had a long association. Actually went to high school with him, and his wife Ange had MND, and passed away a few years ago. So there was a personal link there. And then having known Neil through my role at the AFL, and also when Neil was, coaching head of football over at in WA, and then also working for the Coaches Association. So there was a personal link there. And I've had, a couple of close friends who've had relatives, parents pass away from MND as well. So there's a sort of few links in there, Matt.
Yeah, and that's what I was alluding to before, is that you don't have to dig too deep or go too far to find someone who knows someone who has unfortunately been afflicted by this terrible disease. But the footy connection, I think, particularly in this really amazing year where Neil's been recognised as the Australian of the Year, if you actually drill down right into the sort of, the ground swell levels of community, when things go wrong in Australia, particularly, I guess, in terms of natural disasters, people tend to gather at the footy club, or the footy and netball club, as a lot of them have combined now. And I don't think the AFL's lost that sentiment either. You're really just a capital city version of that. How important is community to the AFL?
Oh, look, community is the AFL. We're super lucky as a sporting organisation, unlike some of the other sports in Australia and worldwide, where not only have we got the responsibility for organising, the elite men's and women's competition, we've also got the responsibility and privilege of administering the game at the grassroots level. And the community part of, every AFL and AFLW player, their journey started at a community footy club. So it is so important for us to continue to have a flourishing elite competition. But the thing that is probably not as well understood is that the economy and the business of community footy, just the size of it, is at least the same size as the elite, if not more. So more people attend community footy games on an annual basis than go to AFL and AFLW games. And the economy of community football in Australia is the same size, if not bigger, than elite men's and women. So it's super important because, as you say, it's where people meet. It's where people actually, in this day and age, particularly regionally, but also in Metro Melbourne and Metro Australia, is actually a place where people can connect and be part of something that's just a little bit bigger than themselves. And that's a really big focus for us, because we feel that, we've got the best game in the world, but we think it's that unique responsibility that we have and that close connection to community that sort of sets us up above others.
I think also one of the things we see at a community level, and we have great support with people doing local community big freeze efforts and wearing their socks for the community round and stuff, is that at the community level, they still love to replicate what's happening at the elite level. But on this occasion, it feels a bit sort of reciprocal. And we really see the players lean into this particular match, the big freeze round, as well. You've got a number of marquee games, but how do you think the big freeze game differentiates in terms of players' emotions?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And, the big games that in the AFL, I was in WA a couple of weeks ago for the Derby, and that is, when you're on the East Coast, until you go over there, you don't realise how big that is. Same with the showdowns in South Australia, but they're uniquely rooted in sort of football rivalries, those ones. In Victoria, we've got the games like, Anzac and Dreamtime, but there's just something that's even, the big freeze game, I think, is almost not transcended, but it is absolutely up there with those games. And I think it's that link to community, that link to helping, find a cure and actually just helping care for people with MNDs, which is what gives it, it's what makes it unique in our fixture. And I think that's why it's a game that was always, Melbourne and Collingwood have played on King's birthdays, Queen's birthday for a number of years, but the link now with the big freeze has taken that game to another level. And I think it's one of those absolutely perfect partnerships where it works really well for the AFL, Collingwood and Melbourne, but it's been unbelievably good for FightMND as well, for raising awareness and importantly raising funds to go into research.
Yeah, and I think as we all know, when we go from week to week, there's various things to look forward to as a footy fan. It feels like we've got quite a long run up for a few weeks as people start to wear their beanies. They see them around the shop, and then there's that sort of critical moment with the sliders on the Monday game and stuff, which we're excited about. But one of the things we're exploring, and I'm not really putting you on the spot here, but I guess I'm looking for your collusion in terms of, we're now looking at a 5-day festival of football across that weekend through the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And the value of that for us is that it becomes more than the Monday game. It can be a festival that builds. In particular, the Carlton-Essendon game on a Sunday night seems to be taking on a bit of a marquee status, depending on the success of those clubs at any one time. Is that something the AFL has an appetite for, like a night version of the Big Freeze and then the day version the next day?
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I think, again, and I think what does happen, though, if we can elevate our matches to more than matches and become events like the Monday game has, then it actually doesn't really matter where the teams are on the ladder, because there's a reason for people. I found AFL has always been a great game to watch live, and our attendances show that we're one of the highest average attendances of any sporting competition in the world. And I think, but even more importantly, post-COVID, we've just seen a massive rebound and increase in our crowds. And I think it's people wanting to be involved and connect. And if there's, and going to a normal footy game, Carlton Collingwood last Thursday night was great, 82,000 people on a Thursday night. But if there can be another reason that just adds to it, I think the AFL's absolutely up for that. It's great for us. But I think if we can then link it in with something that means a lot to people, which I think this fight that we're on now actually really resonates with people, and I think people feel a connection to it. So if we can do that at the same time, that's even better.
And also, like, we talk about community there and stuff. I'm interested in your insights in terms of the players do feel like there's a lot of demands on their time and they have a lot of obligations, and there's this game and that game and the PR we have to do. But I've been lucky enough to witness a little bit. Some people on this webinar a lot more. There is a real connection to Neil from the football community and a great reverence for him. What's your sort of experience of that? And do you get feedback from the Players Association about the value of these sorts of rounds?
Yeah, although, I mean, in particular with Neil, given the leadership position that he had across a number of clubs, and I know a number of the boys, or the guys that played with Neil at Melbourne, and they still just have an incredible connection, and they catch up, more than semi-regularly in a big group, and that's not something you necessarily see at a lot of other clubs, particularly, they were super successful but didn't get the ultimate prize, but still are so closely connected. And I think Neil plays a big part in that. But he's also, got the connection to so many other clubs as well, and has just been a leader in the AFL community and the industry for so long that I think, and just because of the type of person Neil is, I think you only have to meet him once to feel a connection with him.
Well, Dills, we're very appreciative of your time. We know you have to head across to Adelaide and get to Haig's Chocolate before it opens and all your activities commence. But thank you so much for joining us today, and also thanks for the great work you do as a director of our organisation, and of course the wonderful support we get from the AFL every year. So thanks, everyone. You can click your applause emojis, and good luck with the gather round this weekend.
No, absolute pleasure, Matt. And can I just thank everyone who's online today for taking the time out, and thank you so much for your support of FightMND and what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Dills. I just want to take this moment actually before we move into our panel here to invite you all, if you have some questions and you're thinking about them as you go along, as opposed to at the end, in the Q&A section of the webinar, feel free to type them in, and we will get to them once we've gone through our panellists today and had a little bit of a discussion about the impact and the general environment of the work we do and what the challenges are that are ahead. So there's a little Q&A tab somewhere on your webinar. Feel free to start typing your questions in there. It's a great pleasure for me now to introduce to you some of the people who really are at the heart of this organisation, and in particular, people who've been here since the very, very beginning of FightMND, which, as a 10-year-old organisation that's raised $115 million, that's an extraordinary supercharged journey. And there are organisations that have been around for up to 100 years who don't raise the finances that we do and can only dream of the community commitment that we have. But we have to be incredibly rigorous, and we have to be robust. And with that sort of money comes great responsibility. So we have to make sure that we are world class in terms of how we distribute this money and the projects that we invest in, and the difference that we're making to people who are living with MND. So we've got most of those bases covered with this particular panel. I want to first welcome Dr. Beck Sheehan. Dr. B is our Director of Cure Research and Programs here at FightMND. She's been with us for just over 8 years, which is effectively since the beginning. Good morning, Dr. B.
Good morning. Great to be here.
You're in the room next door to me, actually. So if I just kick the wall if you say anything
Knock on the wall.
inappropriate. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, you really are. I always like to say to people that whilst you're eminently qualified as a scientist that came right through the Florey Institute and heavily involved in MND research, you're also one of the warmth and the feeling and the passion, and always reminding us that we need to have people living with MND and their families and their experience at the forefront of what we do. So can you just tell us then, how have things changed? When you started at the Florey, I think there was just a couple of researchers in the MND space, and we had 3 founders who hadn't quite cobbled this organisation together. Can you take people through that history around that time?
Yeah, sure. So before Fight existed, I was doing my PhD at the Florey Institute in Melbourne in motor neurone disease, and I really worked on it. It was just sounded like a really complex disease to study, and from a scientific perspective was really exciting to work on something where there were so many unknowns. And I think my passion for making sure that people with lived experience can have a voice in research really came from my PhD scholarship and a small community out in South Bendigo who fundraised for my scholarship. And so each year I got to go out and meet the community and the family of the woman who had died from MND. And it made me realise how important having that voice was in research. So I remember when Fight first started, I met Dr. Ian Davis, who was one of the founders, who came into the lab to visit us. And we heard this sort of idea around the big freeze and a fundraiser. And I remember watching the tally on my phone when I was in the lab doing research, and I was just blown away that this disease that I'd worked on for so many years that no one had heard of. There was so little funding. Like Matt said, we only had 3 people in our whole research team, and all of a sudden there was this big influx of funding. So I joined Fight 8 years ago. We did our first round of grants. I think we had 12 submissions, and then over the last 8 years that's grown. I think this year we've had over 100 submissions. We have whole teams of researchers all across Australia who are working together, really collaboratively in the fight against this disease.
Thanks, Beck. I would also like to welcome to this panel now, we've got a couple more people to introduce, but somebody who was actually at the kitchen table when FightMND began, and somebody who still works with us to this day. She's generally cobbling together orders around socks for community rounds and netball clubs and football clubs, but today finds herself in Western Australia with her husband Neil as they commence, around the grounds, a lap of Australia, celebrating and recognising Neil's remarkable achievement as the Australian of the Year. So it's a thrill to have you here, Jan. Thank you so much for joining us from Perth this morning.
Thanks for the welcome, Matt, and thanks everyone for getting on today. I think it'll be great to hear all the information, and great to be over here in the West. It's a beautiful sunny day, as it is in Melbourne, I think.
And you're going to bring us back some lovely wines from the Margaret River region, I believe.
I don't think we've got any time to do that, Matt, but I would if I could.
Jan, one of the things you bring to our organisation is a really clear understanding of the greater impact of MND on families, but also you have a real warmth and relatability about when all families are confronted with, medical conditions and tragedies and moments where the life you expected to live is suddenly flipped on its head, and you manage the life and the hand that you've now been dealt. One of the things we talk about a lot here at FightMND is there's no test. It's a long and protracted process to eventually find out that you're going to be confronted and diagnosed with a disease for which there's no cure. And one of the things I love is how you share a very human perspective on that. And I know we're in a webinar, but I've seen you speak before. Can you just take us through what was it like, and what was that day like when you found out that Neil had MND?
It's not a day I like to remember, to be honest, but in 2013, I was working for West Coast Fever. We were in New Zealand at the time, and we were on a 10-day stint there with 2 matches. And I got a phone call from Neil at training one day, and he said he'd been going through quite a few months of tests, etc. And he rang up and he said, "Look, they think I've got MND." And back then we knew very little about it. I'd heard of it, but I didn't know. I had no idea how it would affect our lives. So after training, I went back to the hotel and got out the laptop and got onto Google. and just Googled MND and obviously got some pretty devastating information there. So I think at the time, I mean, it takes so long for it to sink in. And for Neil, he was over back in Perth at the time. I can't even imagine what it would have been like for him to realise that, you know, going from a life where he was working and we were doing all sorts of different things, that he possibly had 27 months to live.
Yeah, it's a remarkable story, and you just get a sense of the busyness and the way you guys threw yourselves into life, the fact that you're at opposite ends of the country, both heavily involved in elite sport, things like that. And, you know, we're in an emotional business. It's hard sometimes to tell these stories, but you continue to do it. You get up, you step up each day, both you and Neil, and I think people find that remarkable. And that's what's been responsible for the spirit of this organisation and our success. And as I mentioned, from that, we've grown into an organisation that has put over $100 million, you know, into this fight and growing the research space in a way that Australia couldn't possibly have imagined. And we'll talk with Dr. Beck a bit about that later on in terms of how the world now views us as a bit of an MND research epicentre, and we've garnished great respect in such a short period of time. One of the great things we're able to do is accelerate research and grow people's careers. And joining us now is Professor Adam Walker. He's from the University of Sydney, which I'm glad I Googled that this morning because yesterday he was online as from the University of Queensland. So he moves around. But Adam, it's a great privilege for us to have you here, and thank you so much for joining us. We know that always in the world of academia and research, people are busy, but you also are one of our Bill Guest mid-career research fellows, which is one of the things we can do. And Bill Guest was our founding chair and still sits on the board. We can't have him on a webinar because he has a very potty mouth, so we allow him to just listen quietly. But can you just explain to people listening, okay, well, that doesn't sound like money going into laboratory equipment and chemicals and computers and research. What is a mid-career research fellow, and how has that changed your career?
Yeah, great. Thanks very much for having me, and I'm really happy to be here. I have a joint appointment with the University of Queensland and the University of Sydney, so either is fine for my introduction. Right. I'm really glad to be the Bill Guest Fellow. And being a mid-career fellow as well. I guess I've been in the MND research space for 20 years or so, but I'm considered mid-career now. The point of a fellowship is really to provide some stability for researchers to develop new ideas and to allow us to develop new ways to study motor neuron disease. So most of the people in Australia who are researchers working on motor neuron disease will work in universities on year-to-year contracts with not a lot of stability. And so being the Bill Guest Fellow allows me to have 4 years of support where I know that I have a job and I can do my research focused on understanding the causes and possible treatments for motor neuron disease. So the funding for the fellowship goes towards supporting my position in the research, but also allowing us to buy reagents to do our lab work and to support the experiments that we're doing with students and junior researchers in the lab as well.
I think you achieve a lot more in 4 years than our politicians. Perhaps you deserve a longer term, but I'm always confronted by that for people so advanced in their careers and so deep in the research, there is this constant need to sort of live hand to mouth in terms of just a number of years to continue your research. Dr. Beck, if we can just swing back to you now, if that's all right. One of the things that I don't think people realise about our organisation is that because MND was relatively obscure when we started, the world wasn't really interested in helping people or running clinical trials in Australia. That seems to have changed remarkably. Can you share a little bit of that story?
Absolutely. So I think I'd been at the organisation for about 4 or 5 weeks when I flew over to the International MND conference in Dublin, and I met with a couple of drug companies, and we were offering to pay, a lot of money, $10 million to bring a clinical trial here to Australia, because at that time there weren't any trials being held, MND trials being held here in Australia. And I think the response we got from one of the drug companies was, why on earth would we go there? It's the middle of nowhere. Do they even do MND research in Australia? Like it was quite shocking that was sort of the opinion of the work that we were doing in the clinical space. And I think we've always been stronger in the preclinical space, but with this investment over the last sort of 10 years, that our reputation in the clinical space has really grown. So Last year, we held a world first global M&D research roundtable. We held it in Melbourne. We had around 50 of the key opinion leaders from all around the globe come to Melbourne. And honestly, a lot of people have quite a lot of FOMO about missing out on that event because it was fantastic. People really worked together on how to solve some of the big problems in M&D. And now Australia is really becoming that real central hub of M&D research. We get, myself and my team get calls and emails throughout the year from drug companies now really wanting to come here. And we've been able to fund 15 trials, so that's over 600 patients, that through the support of our community, we've been able to provide over 600 patients access to participate in those trials.
So that's quite a remarkable, I guess, global footprint, but it did begin around a kitchen table, Jan Danaher. And to have that transformation happen in just 10 years is quite incredible. But I find this a remarkable and sort of fascinating thing. It wasn't always going to be beanies, right? There was some consternation around that.
Yeah, there was. We were tossing up different ideas, and Neil came up with the bandana, and we just turned around and looked at him and said, "No, not happening." And he kept going. He thought it was a great idea, but I think it's one of his ideas that we're glad we didn't take up, because the beanie's been so popular. So and that's just grown and grown from, packing those that first year on our kitchen table after work. We'd all sit around there till about 2 a.m. And then take them down to the post office the next morning on the way to work, and then go again.
That's amazing to think that was an after work thing, an after work activity that you do, given that you and Beck both now work full time inside this organisation. And I've just seen some video last week of a warehouse literally full of pallets of beanies, hundreds of thousands of them, robotic forklifts moving around. It's an incredible thing to think that that's happened so quickly. What's it like for you when you walk down the street and you see people wearing beanies and you just smile to yourself and think, gosh, that I can't believe how this has transformed the state?
It's really incredible, and it's really heartwarming. I think for all people with MND to know that there's people out there that are supporting them and want to help, and want to raise money to try and find some kind of answer to this beast of a disease. So, as I've said to you, Matt, I've been guilty of winding down my window as I'm driving past someone with a beanie on and yelling out, "Love your beanie and thanks," and they look at you like obviously I'm pretty crazy, but it really makes such a difference that there is a community that is behind everyone that's been affected by this disease, and that I think a lot of the time people feel alone. And I think when especially around Big Freeze time, when you see people with beanies and with the Big Freeze socks on, by the way. Matt.
Yes, I knew you mentioned the socks.
I've got to get the socks out there. It really does. It really helps. It really helps families, and I think and people that have the disease.
In fact, I'll go a step further. It's sort of become an international beacon to recognising Aussies when you're travelling, particularly in cold environments. I actually had someone come up to me the other day saying they were in Yosemite National Park and they got on a bus and the person down the front was wearing their FightMND beanie and they were wearing theirs, and they're like, "Oh, right, where are you from?" And of course it was Beck Danaher who was at the front of the bus in Yosemite, and so they couldn't believe there was that connection. But we get photos right across the year, people whether they're at Machu Picchu, or I think we've got to go for the top of Everest really to sort of like peak. But it is a wonderful thing and one of those iconic things, the way people recognise and feel like they're connected. Adam, I wonder if I can turn to you now in terms of research and people listening. My understanding of medical research until I worked here was what you see through the news, which is really just those multiply pronged pipette machines and people in white coats putting coloured liquid into test tubes. I'm like, does that test work for every single disease and medical ailment, or is that just the footage they think we like to see? But what do you do day to day in the laboratory, and how much is thinking and how much is experience, and how big are your teams, and do you sit around and come up with ideas and then spend years on them? What's the day-to-day work like?
Yeah, we do actually spend quite a bit of time at the lab bench pipetting various coloured liquids, which you don't know what it means until you run some experiment.
Right.
So there's a lot of time doing that kind of thing, but also a lot of brainstorming and different people getting together and coming up with new ideas on how we can study the disease better. So my lab has students who are, doing their undergrad degree. We have PhD students, we have postdocs who finish their PhD, and more senior researchers as well. So we all work together to do a variety of different experiments and to come up with ways that we can study the disease. So in my lab, we do a lot of cell culture experiments. So that means we can grow neurons in a dish in an incubator, for example. We can use really great microscopes and protein biochemistry techniques to allow us to look at the changes that are going on within those nerves. We also look at genetically modified mice that we've been able to modify so that they develop features of motor neuron disease, which allows us to study their brains and spinal cords in a way that we can't do in people who have motor neuron disease. So using lots of different techniques and collaborating not just within our small research groups, but with the different labs around Australia and indeed around the world as well, to make sure that we're working together on problems so that we can move things forward as quickly as we can, but also making sure that we're not overlapping and doing research that isn't needed. And I think that in the last 10 years or so, the MND research space has expanded so much. There are a lot more MND researchers, particularly in Australia, but we've also gotten a lot better at collaborating together and sharing ideas and working towards common goals.
Yeah, it's quite amazing, the different, the multiple experiments that you have and the things that can be grown in a dish and the parts of the human body that can be in a cold cupboard and things like that. And some of the laboratories we've toured, you're like, oh, I could do with some of them brain cells. It's incredible. Beck, one of the things I want to talk about is the Global Roundtable that you just referenced before and the critical role you played, and I think continue to play, in reminding the people who are in the laboratories, many of them for their entire career, looking to get funding, looking to progress their research, just how important it is to have people in the room who are living with MND and their voices heard. And I think at that roundtable event we held, where we had people from Oxford Uni and Johns Hopkins in the States and stuff, they all remarked how much that really sort of reinvigorated them and reframed their thinking and the urgency around what we do rather than just the need to continue trekking on. And how important is that, do you think?
I think it's really important. And I mean, a lot of researchers, even myself, when I got into research, I didn't do it because I knew someone with MND. And so my passion was about solving a complex problem and growing the knowledge in this space. And I think it's when you start to meet people with MND that you start to ask different questions, because even things like developing a drug, but it's got to be administered in a way that is really time demanding and invasive for a person with MND, that's probably not a good option for them. So it's really about keeping that person that you're trying to help front and center. And I think when we had the roundtable event in Melbourne, in particular, we had a woman from Canada who has MND, and she has a genetic form of MND, and she's been on a genetic treatment for the last 8 years. And her telling her story about losing a number of members of her family, and then being able to have access to the right treatment, but also being able to be communicated to in a way that she understood what was happening in the trial, and she could then be a voice to tell other people about treatment options. So I think people really resonated with that and were really kind of moved with hearing that experience from a person firsthand. And I think researchers are really motivated about, publishing papers and getting grant funding. But at the end of the day, I think everybody is really there because they really want to help people.
Dan, this is the first big adventure for you and Neil and Beck across to Western Australia as part of what we think will be a whirlwind tour of the nation, with Neil as Australian of the Year. But of course, one of the things people forget is that every day gets harder. And that's already a big thing to imagine, actually spending a year out meeting people from Australia. It's exhausting. Everybody wants a piece of your time. But the remarkable thing about Neil, I mean, this is kind of half true, but I reckon between him being announced as the Australian of the Year and him shaking Anthony Albanese's hand, I got a text message from him saying, right, what are we going to do with this? Like, he's completely driven by everything he does and everything he thinks about advancing this fight. And you all are, in a way, because you all obviously have to support him with that. But what sort of energy do you get off people when you go to events and experience things? And on Sunday, there was a big walk to the Freo game. What does that feel like? And how do people interact with you in those moments?
Oh, look, I think it's wonderful getting to meet so many different people around Australia, and also to spread the word, obviously, about MND and FightMND. But the event on Sunday was absolutely fantastic. We got to meet, we had 15 kids come up to us, and they'd written a letter, and they'd, made some art, and one young girl had signed a footy and gave it to us. And so we collected all those up, and we've read all of those, and we've put them up around the room in the hotel. So they're fantastic events. It's a great opportunity. We're always looking, how can we promote FightMND? How can we get the message out there? So Neil being Australian of the Year has given us a great platform to be able to spread the word, and hopefully get more people involved, and more communities involved wherever we go. But we all really like to meet people, and every event Neil goes to, we think, we don't know how he's going to get there. But for some reason, there's something in there internally in him that, one day he'll say, oh, look, I don't think I'm going to get there tomorrow, but I know he's going to get there. He'll get there. He'll do whatever he can. And now it's incredibly difficult getting him anywhere. It takes an awful lot of time, and it has an awful lot of preparation. But when he gets there, he looks like he's, ready to go. So we just love the community people we meet, really. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a really good point that you make. And I always say to people, because obviously anyone connected with FightMND, you're immediately asked about Neil, things like that. It's that, people see the very, very best of him. It takes a huge amount of effort and energy. And I remember just a week or two ago when we were lucky enough to meet the Governor of Victoria, but he'd had a fall on his way there because, and people forget the trauma of that, because in the moment, in front of the television cameras, in the picture on socials, he's got that irreverent smile, that cheeky glint in his eye, but it's really hard work. It takes hours, right, to get to these events. Yeah,
it does. And often just before he goes either onto the stage or out in public, we've had an hour of him choking, or it could, many, many different things can happen. So when he actually does get out there, I look at them and I know myself and the carer will be going, oh my God, he's out there. But people don't understand what goes on behind the scenes, and he's just incredibly strong and incredibly determined that while he's alive, he will do whatever he can to, help FightMND and just raise awareness for this, and money, obviously, for research.
It's a remarkable story, but we really are nothing without the hundreds of people on this webinar now. And I would like to throw open to questions if people have them. I think Lynn, who is our Director of Fundraising, is actually cobbling all the questions together and going to read out some of them for you guys, if you don't mind.
Thanks so much, Matt. We've got some great questions coming through from everyone online. So we've got a question from Chris. He's asking, why is MND not a notifiable disease? Who on the panel would like to take that one?
I think we'll have to do paper, rock, scissors.
I am happy to take that one. So usually notifiable diseases are limited to infectious diseases. But I know there was a petition from an amazing guy called Woz, who rode his lawnmower to Parliament to try to petition to have MND as a notifiable disease. But it is usually limited to diseases that are infectious or have a public health risk. But what we're trying to do in the MND space to sort of overcome the fact that it's not a notifiable disease is to have really strong data on the people who are living with the disease currently. So things like registries, we have a genetic database collecting information about people's history, their environmental history, so where they were born or where they lived, where they grew up. And what we hope is that data will help us to really capture what's happening here in Australia with the people that are currently living with the disease.
That's great. Thanks so much, Beck. We've also got a question from Mark. So unfortunately, Mark, his friend has recently been diagnosed with MND, and Mark's asking a question about how can he make a meaningful impact to both support his friend while he's going through this and support FightMND.
That might be you, Jan, I think.
Yep, okay, I'm happy to talk about that. Look, I think it's just whatever. It's great to have community around you, and I think sometimes you can get really isolated, of the family and obviously the person with MND. So great to keep community around, and great to have a purpose. So you know, obviously FightMND has given us a great purpose, and it's given us something to work really hard towards. And I think it's just being there and being able to, you know, speak with your friend and talk through the things that are the issues that they're having, and getting the support too from there's so much support out there now from, you know, physios, doctors, speech pathologists. And look, Neil uses all of them, and he has a really strict daily routine, and I think that really helps him keep things going. But I think, look, it's getting people around you and not being isolated, so that you feel like there's people behind you supporting you. And then, you know, fundraising is always a great way, in organising an event. As we say, we like to have fun when we're fundraising, and getting a little community together and doing an ice bucket challenge and seeing the people that want to help you is uplifting.
That's great. Thanks so much, Jan. We've got another question, and this might be to Dr. Beck, around data. Do we have much data that in accounts of different communities across Australia that is able to show the prevalence of MND?
We have a little bit of data across Australia. I mean, globally, there's some really interesting data around different areas where there seems to be a higher incidence. But in Australia, there hasn't been a national incidence study. It's something that we would really like to see supported. While there is some sort of anecdotal evidence, there really needs to be stronger data to support that kind of strong understanding of incidence across Australia.
Great, thanks, Beck. This next question is from Lisa. Lisa's interested to know our focus on research. Is it around prevention? Is it around cure, treating symptoms, or is it a combination of all?
Yeah, so our focus at Fight, or our focus for investment is really around what we call sort of like the cure. So it's about developing treatments and funding clinical trials so that people with MND have access to participate in clinical trials. And then more recently, we've also been investing in research to understand the causes of MND. And I might let Adam talk a little bit about his research and how he looks into understanding the causes of MND. But what we realize is that we want to focus on developing treatments, but in order to have a really effective treatment, you really need to understand the fundamentals of the disease. And there's so much that we don't know about it. And that sort of underpins a lot of the work that Adam is doing with his team.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that, Beck. Thank you. I think it's a really good point that we really need to understand the causes of disease to come up with better treatments. And one of the problems that we've had in the MND space is that it's been really hard to tease apart the different biochemical mechanisms that are causing nerves to degenerate in people who have motor neuron disease. But I think over the last 20 years that I've been involved in MND research, the amount of knowledge that we've gained in that space has really accelerated quite dramatically. So when I started my PhD, we had no idea what sort of the pathology of the disease was in people who had died with motor neuron disease. We now know a key protein that we know clumps in these large aggregates in the nerves of people with MND in almost all cases. So we know what happens pathologically. If we look in the brains or spinal cords of someone who's passed away with MND, we can now recognize what has happened at the later stages of disease. So now we're using that information to go back and try and work out what's triggering those pathological changes as well. And using all the different techniques that we have at hand has really accelerated that, including the amazing equipment that we now have access to that we couldn't have even dreamed about 10 years ago. For example, we're using a lot of gene editing techniques, which were not even possible when I was doing my PhD, but now they're routine in the lab. So using all these sort of new advances in biological research.
That's great. Thanks so much, Adam. One last question that we've got time for is from Colleen. So Colleen is a resident, and this is for you, Matt, and possibly Jan. Being a resident in rural Queensland and a very passionate Essendon supporter, is there any other merch that might be more suitable for the climate up in Queensland?
That's a very good question, Colleen. And
Socks.
given that I know all your email addresses, which wouldn't make it too hard to find out where you live, I'm comfortable sharing some confidential information with you. But if it goes public, as I said, I know where you live. So yes, we are, for the Queensland market, testing some caps this year, because the issue with Queensland is, one, it's not really beanie weather, and two, blue beanies aren't great for Maroons fans. They kind of consider them the enemy. So we're cognizant of all that, and that's why we're going to trial some corduroy caps. So that's a bit of an exclusive you've heard here. So we definitely have been thinking strongly about Queensland. We've done quite a little, given out quite a bit of money, and we visited UQ last year. Queensland's a very important part of our story, and that's what we're trying to do. And it's a great thing about this year as Australian of the Year, is that we are growing to a situation where people can recognise we're not just helping people with MND in Victoria, we're helping them in Australia and across the globe. And we want everyone to feel like they can be a part of that fight. So yes, whether those caps will have any red and black on them, stay tuned. That's the dream next year. I think the challenge for people going to the footy wearing our beanies is, yeah, but how do I show my team?
And it'd be also good, Matt, if the person's got any suggestions too, that we could always have a look at as well.
Yeah. Except we've already thought about stubby holders. It's a very Queensland thing, but it's not on the table for us.
Thanks so much, Matt. So that's the end of the Q&A that we've got time for. I know there's some great questions still in the chat, so we will come back to all the supporters directly, and I'll reach out to the panel to get those answers. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lynn. You're a bit of an anonymous entity there, but I really appreciate you pulling this event together. But more importantly, I appreciate everybody who's tuned in today. I know you're all busy, but, you know, we all like the odd moment where we can call a webinar work and just sit there with our screen off. But the most important thing we want you to feel as you leave today is that your contributions to our organisation have made an enormous impact on the MND landscape. And there is so much more work to do, and there is so much more passion to be harnessed, so that we can continue to get closer and closer. But I do ask you to consider this as you leave. When we started, there was just a couple of people in the Florey Institute. When Adam started, there were machines that hadn't even been thought of yet that are now part of the daily use. So we are making progress. There is impact. There aren't always big headlines about, oh, we think we're just a year away from a cure or whatever. But good things take time, and we are doing a good thing here. And I can't thank you enough for your support and your passion and the way you share our story, but you share your hearts and you share your financial contributions, which is really a big part of funding research. And we are incredibly grateful. We remain very humble, and our door is always open. And as Lynn said, if you've got any questions or questions remaining, we're happy to answer those. But please reach out to us and contact us at any time. I really thank you for your time, everyone. And now you've done your emojis, I also want to obviously thank our panel guests, Jan in Western Australia, Dr. Beck, who's just in the room next door, and Professor Adam Walker, who's in Sydney but could be in Queensland at any moment. Adam, thank you so much for your insights. We've really enjoyed hearing from you today. So thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.